I did have, uh, Dr. Echols, I did wonder if I might get 2 minutes of time before the end of this to talk about environmental controls on coal plants. I have a couple questions for you. And Jamie's here. She might even have a view on what I'm going to be talking about in terms of data problems that we're in the thick of. And Hamilton Steimer has been working with me. Do we think
Yeah,
we might have 2 to 3 minutes or
of
5?
course.
Great.
Of course. I'm not a doctor though, but anyway, I'm going to play one on this call, but
Okay.
Perhaps we could do that first, and that'll give Sol a chance to join us.
Oh, all right.
yeah,
Wonderful.
let's go ahead. Let's go ahead with that, Dr. Brown.
All right. Well, we've been doing some modeling of the magnitude of pollution that could be avoided if solar farms were to be expanded significantly in the state of Georgia. And in our modeling, we're using a tool that is already loaded up with all kinds of FERC data on existing emissions. And we're finding that the forecast using this FERC data indicates that Georgia emissions of NOx should be much lower than, in fact, the EPA state profiles are reporting, about by like an order of magnitude. And we've been trying to look at the IRP, which does indicate an investment in scrubbers has occurred. And of course, we know it has occurred over the last decade, but it's not, we're still seeing from the EPA state profile of emissions very high levels of NOx emissions relative to what our modeling tool says should be occurring. Do you have any sense, has there been, are there plans for some significant scrubber technologies over the next few years that maybe our forecast is presaging, so to speak?
I have a couple questions for you. First, what's the year of the data? Is it current?
2019 has just been released. 2019 data shows, indicates pretty high NOx levels. I mean, not as high as the 1990s. We're way down. There's been a great deal of progress. But for instance, we were looking at Plant Shearer, and there's only one of the 4 units that has been scrubbed recently for NOx. So we wondered maybe there's the plan to do that, and they've already perhaps filed it with FERC, and the FERC data shows that. I just don't know.
The EPA data, because I interviewed Gil, who's the air quality specialist, subject matter expert, recently on my radio show from EPA. I went down there and did a whole hour with him. And so let me make sure that this data set that you have, is this southern data coming out of the plant, or are these EPA sensors in the area? Do you know?
I believe the data that's being reported is what is being given to FERC as emissions, and they must be based on plant specific. We are looking at plant specific data. We do have that, and they total the state total. So they have been apportioned to each plant. Hamilton, the top 3 plants account for about 80% or something of the NOx. You might have a better number for me than that, but.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
No.
I was just saying that I just posted a little comment just to kind of reflect exactly the difference that we're seeing between our models data and what the EPA says. And we're looking at this data. It's EPA clean air emissions data, but it's also reflected in the EIA state profile. So, and as Dr. Brown says, it's per plant data, so it's very specifically allocated to each plant. We can see where it is, and we had a friend of ours who used data from the S&P and Dr. Brown mentioned this, which shows that I think 800 megawatts, or maybe one unit of shear as the scrubbers. And so part of the confusion and what we were thinking was, well, maybe is there any planned expansion to the whole plant versus just the one unit?
Yeah, it's my understanding that we're not going to be doing any more scrubbers. In fact, we're in the process of closing coal, and we've just approved the closure of additional plants. So I would think that we're, that we're in a downward trajectory on that. Jamie, would you mind just emailing while you're sitting there? Would you mind emailing
Gil?
Not Gil, but why don't you email our Georgia Power environmental guy and see if he'll respond to you about nitrogen oxide at our plants, and if there are any additional plans for, I don't think there's going to be any additional plans for any scrubbers, but just say, is there maybe any new data, or is there any explanation for increased nitrogen oxide? Have we had problems with the scrubber? Has it not been working? So Dr. Brown, let us dig in now on the call, and then I'll dig in further afterwards to find out why is there a discrepancy. I'd also like to ask Gil, I'm going to email Gil myself here in a moment, and just because he didn't bring this up in my interview with him. He was talking about a lot of other air quality related issues, but it seems like if there was an issue there, he probably would have said, let me just double check with him during our call. But Dr. Brown, we will circle back and get an answer for you on this.
Oh, you're very kind. I appreciate it so much. Thanks.
Julian, why don't you go ahead and introduce our key speaker today, and then towards the end of the call, we'll get some updates from Crystal and other folks, as well as Charlotte and some other folks on the call.
Yes, sir. So the idea for this call with our guest Roy Taylor came from a phone call that Roy and I had a few weeks ago. Roy is kind of a green architect in Canton, and my girlfriend and I are planning a new home, and we'd like to build in as many high performance features as possible. Some of the standard stuff like spray foam insulation and zone ductless mini splits, that kind of thing. But we'd also like to look at some kind of beyond standard things like phase change materials in the building envelope. Things that are a little outside the box. And that led to a pretty long discussion with Roy, and it turned out we had a lot of common interests on some of the same topics, and that's kind of where the idea for this call came up, which is to approach high performance building technologies for residences, but done on a budget. Things that are going to pay off reasonably quickly. Roy pointed me to a group called Pretty Good House. prettygoodhouse.org is their webpage. And they kind of really encapsulate this whole concept of going as far as you can beyond the minimum building code standards, but doing so in a pragmatic manner and not busting your budget. And again, going for items that have a reasonably quick payback period. So on that note, Roy, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us more about your background. You're muted.
My name is Roy Taylor. I have a small architectural firm here in Canton, RT3 Architects. We do a wide variety of projects, as small firms tend to do, but I have always kept an interest in working on residential work, along with all of the different commercial work that I do, much of which is adaptive reuse of facilities. But within the residential work, I have a great interest in affordable housing. And that is a huge term that is often misunderstood. Everything from, because it is such a wide aspect of the housing market. And it starts at its very, smallest form as to indigent assisted living that are through the different housing authorities that we have, to people that are trying to just make it to, what is housing that I can afford, to the larger picture of what is the housing that we would expect our service people to be able to have. In other words, so this is a level that is probably the largest and puts us in really a housing crisis that is mostly invisible to people. This is the type of housing that's going to be for the young families, families of, that are either just starting out or families of 4. It's a teacher, in the first couple of years. It's the police, fire, any number of the service industries that we've got. So it is sometimes called workforce housing. And if we look at our numbers that we have around, we've got that a family of 4 in the metro area earns about $55,000 collectively a year. And we look at what could you buy for that amount of money as your starter home or getting into it. So this is all before we get into what are we going to do to make it a really sustainable house. We're looking at just getting the roof overhead. And so at $55,000 or maybe $60,000 a year, you can only afford a $165,000 to $180,000 home. And those are not being built. If you go around, at least in my area, Cherokee County and the surrounding counties there, and you go by any housing development, this is not the, add the extra prices of being downtown of Atlanta itself, but surrounding Atlanta, you see housing developments mostly starting in the 300s, and it goes up from there, so that starts looking at what is the house amount that we're talking about being able to build for. And once you've got that, then you can start looking at how are we going to bring in the different factors that exist within that housing cost, because the actual cost of the house, the mortgage that we're putting out there, or for those people that are renting that rent for the month, is one portion of housing. But if you're fortunate enough to be able to be owning the house and can be making other investments into it, we can look at being able to drive down the user costs. What is the utility costs of owning that house, and how can we reduce it? And that's where we get into being able to look at replacing the initial capital cost with the ongoing cost of being able to afford a house, and that really looks at those extra costs at the same time. So, it is that monthly nut that you're having to make. And if I am in a very leaky, uninsulated, marginally, weatherized house, my utility costs are going to be much higher, even though my initial costs might have been lower in being able to afford that. So this is where we start looking at what are the different abilities to bring down the user costs of a house. One of the biggest and easiest is tightening it up and insulation. So we could start looking at that as part of what are we doing to retrofit the houses that we're going to be looking at. But on the houses that we're building, many of you who are aware of the different types of standardizations that are out there, and we have a very nice one here in this area, Earthcraft housing put out by the South Face folks as one of the standards. The different, the NHAB has green homes. We have LEED for homes as part of the USGBC, and we've got the standards put out by Passive Homes, which are very restrictive. And then we move into Living Building Challenge and what they're looking for as another one. A group up in New England, many of them are in Maine, had started to get together. It was a builder designer group. They have their own name of where they get together weekly. It's called BS and Beer. It started as a local group and has moved online. The BS is building science, and they look into all of the different aspects of what it is. And they were working over about a 10-year period of seeing what made sense to move forward with in the different types of building construction and materials that were out there. And that's how they came up with, this is a pretty good house. And proceeded to put together a very loose set of guidelines for being able to put them together. How do we get houses built that are beyond code? They amusingly talk about code-built houses as the absolute worst type of house that you can legally build. Is, that's your starting point. That's what a code-built house that's just built to the code regulations that we have. We in Georgia have been moving ahead with taking on some of the, and lifting up, although they're always years behind in looking at the energy codes and such, but we are getting there. So,
hey, Roy, can I stop you and ask a question?
Sure.
I recently on my radio show, I had a guy named Christopher Matos Rogers, who's a real estate agent, and he's a green agent. So one, I didn't know that there were green appraisers and green agents, but we were talking about this topic about showcasing sustainability features on an MLS listing, right? Like solar panels or solar thermal or geothermal. And the importance of that MLS listing for people as they're buying houses, and also as they're getting appraisals, so that they can get that additional value. So as you're presenting, I'm just wondering about some of the things that that you may be doing or or promoting in a home. Is it going to, I guess, bring a financial return, and with that MLS listing, and these green certified appraisers and agents, is there any way to help educate them and move them along in their evolution of learning about this?
Yes, but that's almost that. So these become really huge topics. It becomes, what are we talking about for the homeowner? And then when you start getting into the financing side of it, what does it mean now? And what does it mean over the life of the house? So there are many things that get brought into, and some are already accepted in the industry. Where you build your house, is it within so many feet, miles of a transportation hub? You know, where can I get the bus? Where can I pick up the train? How am I doing? And that's already reflected in some of the mortgages that are supported by Fannie Mae, of having transit-oriented design that, you know, incorporates some of that. The other things that we're looking for, you know, that exist in a couple of areas, and I don't think that there's any overall standard yet. So this would have to be where realtors, and green realtors are the people you're going to, you know, probably have to get to fight for this, of looking at a couple of the different standards points that you would get through building these certain, you know, if you build yourself a tight house, if you can have it down to a certain Pascal rating, if you can get it to what is it insulated at, what is it being able to, and each of those things are different for different regions. So these guys up in Maine and New England are building to a different standard because they've got a colder climate. They have a drier climate. We've got a warm and wet climate. So we have to build a different set of standards to be able to get those comfort features and the long range features into the house. So I don't know where we would pull all of that stuff together and how you would do it in a regional manner. But if we're just talking the Southeast or Georgia itself, those, you know, we know what it needs to be here. We know what we have to be looking at. So there could be a set of standards that went everything from using the last year's utility bills to doing a blower air test on the house to looking at its levels of insulation, or what are some of the other features that have been built in, and could come up with the standards that could be built into a real estate, call it greenhouse, you know, that you put a little sign in, you know, on the yard that would say certified by some manner. I don't know, Marilyn, are any of the people that you know working on any of the standards for?
Well, my question for you on standards had to do really more with whether or not there was good code enforcement. You know, in the state of Georgia, the studies have shown that while it may be, you know, the beyond carbon is needed because the beyond code is needed because the code is so lax, but the codes aren't so very lax. The enforcement is really problematic, is what I understand from having seen a few studies to that effect. So it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's the codes and it's the enforcement. They both need to be fine-tuned.
Well, and that's where it can be designed correctly or designed not correctly.
Right.
It can be built correctly or not built correctly.
Yeah.
It can be, you know, is somebody watching out for these different things? And so that gets into testing. That's why we have to do some level of, although I don't like the term commissioning, that's sort of the term we have for a bunch of these different things, of looking at it to whether or not where we are, not either just as it's being built, but a year or two after it's been built.
Yeah.
Did it stay tight? Did it stay, you know, once everything has already settled, once everything has shrunk and the moisture's been driven out of the house over that first 6 months, 9 months of use, You know, where are we with things? So there's a variety of different ways of how we could finally come back and do that, either just before it's sold or to get some sort of a certification and built on energy use. But that's not necessarily a good judge, because if we were going to judge the last year my mother had her house, you know, the heat was always on. It was way up. So that isn't necessarily an average use of something if we're going to use somebody like that, you know, just using utilities as a standard by which to judge things.
Yeah.
Boy, let me ask any of our other folks on the call, because we do like to have a lot of dialogue.
Yeah.
Let me ask if any of the other folks have a question for you at this point, because our call will be an hour, and we're going to save the last 15 minutes for some discussion on projects that everybody's working on. So does anyone have a does anyone have a question for Roy at this point that's come up in your mind that you want to stop and address right now?
Yeah, Roy, how does that apply to the HERS rating of a home? Isn't that already a factor for?
Well, again, HERS is done while it's, you know, under construction. I don't know if you're doing a post years of existence HERS ratings on houses. I've not heard of them doing that, other than to use the same methods when you're trying to do an energy analysis for doing an upgrade. So that possibly could. Again, that involves the blower door test that would be needed to see how leaky a house is. Then there's some visual inspections about the HERS rating has some issues around how it quantifies the appliances and the mechanical systems that are in, and it makes a series of judgment calls, and it works for them, but I've heard a number of different people complaining that it doesn't pick up all of the different things that may be being worked on within the house.
I have heard that the HERS has been able to be accomplished now in states that are requiring it. Texas, for instance, has been able to bring the cost of HERS ratings down to just a couple $100 a house, which is all, you know, that's always the problem. It's an extra cost to get that rating, and if it's not required, that's a real barrier. But the prices and the costs have been coming down, so that's a good sign.
Roy, I wonder if, because so many people use home inspectors, right? I mean, that would be a great add-on service for them to do the blower door test and to be able to give that score, an updated score, to your point, that would account for all the and everything that's happening. Where is this house right now, you know, in terms of its, you know, energy efficiency?
So that gets into, you know, how do we take those improvements and bring them along? Probably you are not going to get house inspectors who are really looking at materials or looking at, you know, how well the house is weathered or something, into adding on that energy audit. Energy audit is its own set of criteria, and I think that those are two separate things, and it would be wonderful if there was a way to bring them together to be able to do stuff, to be able to set that rating. But there are other finance things that get into how do we afford to put into a house. I'm only going to be here for another 5 years. Is there a payoff in adding that extra insulation, or in adding the new windows, or in upgrading the mechanical system in it? And there is a type of financing that allows you to work with your cities, if they are willing to take it on, that will put that finance money into a, it works with a fund that gets developed so that it actually gets made, that improvement gets made as a part of the value, the taxable value of the house itself, so that you pay for that work by the increase in the tax value of your house, so that it gets paid out over time, and that improvement and bonus gets left with the house itself, so that if it is sold, it is not a complete, sorry about the call there, being able to, it's not a loss for the homeowner who did the work to get it in that place. And I'm trying to remember the name of that system that puts together, somebody else here may remember that offhand, but it's one of those acronyms of that's out there as one of the financing methods. So what the group that's put together this Pretty Good House, they are worried about a number of different things of how we go about bringing the better insulation in. We have some very good insulation out there with whether it be in the board form or foam in place forms, using the urethane foams and other different ones that are available out there. And they start looking at the carbon and what is the footprint that's getting created at the same time. So they're not particularly, there's not like, oh, well, foam in place, it's the best thing and we should do all of our houses that way. They look at a whole host of things. And so I encourage you to go to that website. It would be impossible in the short period of time that we have on the call here to talk about the different, all of the different systems that are there. Although if it is of interest to go through that, I would put together a PowerPoint that we could do through a shared screen or something, and go into that in greater depth. But since this is my first time on a call with you guys, I'm not even sure where each of you fit into this picture of what we're talking about here today. I know some of you through just seeing you at conferences or at other types of meetings, or followed your information on various internet connections.
I would, this group is a group about learning new things. So none of us are obviously home builders or experts in this. I think we all share an interest in sustainability. We all are interested in moving our state forward, and certainly the housing market, the housing stock, affordable housing, energy burden, all of that is a piece of what you're talking about here. And by having experts appear on our calls together, it just helps us be able to know what else we want to study about this, or other inquiries that we might want to make.
Well, so not only do we want to be building good houses, and this is across the country, but it is absolutely an issue here in Georgia. We do not have enough houses being built. So how do we get more houses? How do we get them figured out, ways of getting them done efficiently, affordably, so that we can, and this COVID issue time that we're living in, the idea is that some of the issues that we've got of how we've had a little bit of government monies that have helped people out with some rent and helped people, some mortgages, and some of the companies doing those have been doing forbearance where they'll let a couple of months go and they'll just tack it on at the end of the mortgage. It's running out, and we're going to end up with a real problem possibly starting this month, because some of the that extra $600 a month that might have been keeping people in, meeting their rent is ending this month. And where are we going to be in the next 90 days? And how are we going to do that with or without federal funding being able to bring that in as an issue? So that gets beyond all of the energy stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, and that's probably a little more controversial than where we want to go on our call. Other questions for Roy on this topic of housing?
Hi, Roy. I'm Saul, a friend of Julian. I had a question about going back to some of the engineering things you were talking about in terms of making an efficient house or a building. Modeling and simulation is one approach we've taken at the High Performance Building Lab. Now that's always fraught with peril because, garbage in, garbage out. And it can also be time consuming to model. But we've come up with certain spreadsheets and complex calculators that really expedite the whole modeling of the efficiency of a house to get a sense of whether before it's built or even after it's built, how efficient it really is in terms of, as you know, EUI, energy use indicator, which is the typical metric being used for most buildings, maybe not residential. What has your experience been with modeling and simulation, and have you been able to incorporate some of that into what you're doing?
On most of the things that I do, the budget isn't there to do the extra modeling. It's just like what was being mentioned earlier about certifications. It adds another cost, and many of the people that I'm working with would rather use prescriptive methods that the money would just be spent directly on, I get another couple of inches of insulation or something, instead of modeling it to tell me I might need a couple more inches of insulation where I would just have to put it in anyway. So I unfortunately have not been working on projects that have gotten into it. I really like the idea of modeling and wish that it was simpler. Wish that there was ways that we could just put in more of the basics, and even though it is just simple it would be something that would be cost effective and could be done. And just like getting the HERS things done, if we could get to a point where there was some level of uniformity in what was being sought, and everything from sun angles to the, where you are, longitude and latitude, where we are, with the amount of perimeter, our surface area of our house and roof, and being able to look at our windows and know what, there's basically a fairly small range of windows that, between a U value of someplace, in the good windows, or someplace in a 2 or 0.2 something or other U value, and then just get worse from there. Same thing with our doors. So it would be interesting to see how that, would it be possible to create a very basic residential, designed for residential thing. Maybe you could preload a lot of things that just say for this area, for the zone that you're building in.
Absolutely. I have some ideas about that. We can take that offline, Roy. Certainly, I know Julian will be very interested in that as well. So we'll talk further about that. Thank you.
Yeah. That sounds good.
One more thing on the financing, Roy. I think you were mentioning the pay-as-you-save or on-bill financing type of arrangements, or in fact, basing it in the property tax of the property, so that the costs are paid over a long period of time as the bills, are, so you're offsetting your bill savings with a slightly higher property tax or a slightly higher payment to the utility to cover the cost if they're financing it. Those are really wonderful financing arrangements. So they are available in some of the rural areas. So rural electric co-ops have been doing the pay-as-you-save financing. And I think that Georgia Power may have a bit of on-bill financing pilot testing.
They have a very small program that is now out. I think it's for about 500 homes or something like that. And we'll see where that goes. We had been talking about it for years.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where, is time running out for some of this stuff? I don't, so a lot of us in the industry, we went to school learning a bunch of these different things, setting up our aspirations of how we were going to move forward with the different ways of talking about housing and talking about building things. And then we had this lull, that was 70s, lull during the 80s where we had a bunch of setbacks because of certain things happening between inflation of different areas of different administrations and how they looked at stuff and thought we were all being fools. But someplace in the early 90s, things changed. And I know that that happened here in the Atlanta area, although I didn't get here till 95, because that was the creation of institutions like South Face and looking at these different things of how would we go about creating some standards of making better houses and making them more energy efficient. And that gets into, so we're finally, so that's 25 years later, 30 years later, I think South Face just had their 30th a year ago or something. We're finally addressing some of these issues. And if we are going to move forward, we're going to need to move forward with a little bit more speed than we have been doing in the past. And I think that we're seeing some of the things come to fruition that that different agencies are looking at our environmental impacts. And we just had over this past weekend some very good signs of that. We had two of the energy giants that were putting forward the Atlanta pipeline say maybe we shouldn't be putting that much investment into a fossil fuel infrastructure at this time. And I think that that's a good sign to see. I think that it was a good sign to see the judge that had finally decided that the DAPL pipeline that was going across the Indian lands there in Dakota was done without proper assessment. We did not have a full environmental assessment of that project when it moved forward, and he said that was a mistake. And then there was the other finding that I guess it was a different judge. I'm not sure exactly. There was a third portion to that, which was that they just stopped it. They have to drain that pipe.
Yeah. So
that project is not finished. They haven't decided to not do that pipeline, but it is stopped for the moment.
Well, there is a major trend toward electrification in the buildings industry. Now, building homes that are all electric, there's so many benefits to that. Easier to be smart and easier to be clean if your electricity is low carbon. And then that's really where much of the European Union, for instance, is going toward all electric homes. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I'd be interested in Commissioner Echols' view on that.
Yeah, I'm not at war with natural gas, and I know,
I know.
Mr. Roy, the whole pipeline thing is probably beyond the scope of the housing stuff we wanted to cover. But I mean, like California, for example, is, trying to move towards not having gas in homes, and, they can do whatever they want out there. I mean, it's their state and they can make those decisions, but, natural gas is an important part of us, reducing emissions here. And so I guess I'm not on that bandwagon of I mean, it may be a bridge fuel.
Mhm.
It's been a bridge fuel. And that's great. And it did what it needed to do. And it is time to recognize that, and we're not going to stop using any of these types of fuels quickly. What we need is a plan. What is our plan to move to that all electric? The all electric will cost less, will be more efficient, will have health benefits, will have all sorts of different things as we move in that direction. And so, do we make a lot of investments at this point into doing it the way we've been doing it? Or do we recognize that, yes, we built some bridges and we're going to be using those bridges for some time, but what will it take to get us past things? So I look at that personally and I go, well, what is my plan? Because I have a 1800s house that I've been renovating, and it is going to always be leaky. It has gas heat and cooking that I have liked, but as I'm tightening it up, what will I replace the different things, appliances and mechanical systems with? So the next one that's going to go is a water heater, because it's got some age to it. And so I know that we are going to do some version of a heat pump water heater. When I am making advice to people about the types of heating systems that would go into their house or their addition, so that they're not expanding their use of gas, is to work with these very high efficiency mini splits, whether they're ducted or not, into houses, and that can be a real bonus. And these things, as we move to greater amounts of solar and such, we're just doing, we're just starting to eliminate what we're using. We can do that also with our vehicles, because we have to look at this whole thing systematically. It's not just our houses, it's how we live and work and such. And so in my plan, I am now in a hybrid, and when that car wears out, I will be in a full electric vehicle.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to make you feel guilty because you're not driving an electric car today. So you and I can talk about that later, because you should feel guilty. No, I'm just teasing.
But I'm saying it's a plan. And so what we need to be working on most now is what is the plan for us personally? What is the plan for our communities? How are our cities going to move and make this transition? And I think that that's part of what was seen with the decision around the Atlantic pipeline, was that we may be, these investments that we make are for the next 40, 50 years. And maybe we need to be putting that money towards things of what we're moving toward instead of where we've been.
Well, Roy, I really appreciate your input today, and we've got about 10 more minutes on our call, and I want to get some reports from some of our members today, and really appreciate your challenge and your passion, and your expertise. So let me go to Charlotte and Crystal and some of the folks on our call regularly, Jason, and ask if any of you have any reports on any of the things that you've been working working on as a part of our focus. Charlotte, let me go to you first. Any news on some of the stuff you've been working on?
Well, this was a really interesting discussion. We have a third floor that we left it raw when our house was built, and then a few years ago we decided to finish it. And I went to the Life Cycle Center in the city, and I asked my builder to use some of the things from there. And I wanted to do it even more, but when you do that, it does drag out the building process. But when the inspector came to approve he just said that the quality was amazing. So I was really proud of that. But you know, it would be great if you could get a subsidy or a tax break to encourage people to do it more.
On my radio show recording today, we interviewed a guy named Damon Carson who runs the repurposing facility in Denver. Got a location in South Carolina, Dallas, and he does reuse and repurposing of materials. Very hard to get rid of materials like translucent, plastic, yellow, material that was mismade for a building. And so rather than just landfilling it or recycling it, which takes energy, he tries to come up with the reuse for the material, tempered glass, conveyor belts, you know, escalator handles, all kind of stuff. And we were just talking about, you know, how great it is, you know, to be able to actually reuse or repurpose something from a sustainability perspective, because it doesn't require any energy in order to use that material. So that's great that you went to that life cycle facility, and it's something we really need to do more of. Thank you, Charlotte. Crystal, let me go to you. I know you've been working on your stuff. Any news on Georgia Gwinnett and the electric vehicle rideshare stuff?
No, I don't have anything further as far as actual work on campus. I haven't been back to campus yet. I figure that I'll probably pick up once I get back there. I did not get the fellowship though.
You did not?
No, I got the
I'm
letter.
sorry.
But I didn't get it. It was a very positive letter. It was very nice. Yeah, that didn't happen. But I did have a question for Roy as far as like future designs on sustainability and housing, green housing. Have you heard about like the way Earthships design their homes? Not so much as like using the actual recycled trash tires and stuff, but just the design itself, using like greenhouses as buffering systems and thermal mass to kind of regulate the temperature. There's people doing it out west, and they've got like 100-degree heat in the summertime and like -10 in the winter, and it stays like a nice 70 degrees inside their home year round.
Yes. So, and there are different places that different types of housing works better. The creating, you know, so many of those houses are being built at least partially into the ground. They're using the that as a, you know, if sort of 2/3 of your house is underground and you're not dealing with 100 degrees on one side, you know, -10 on the other. You're dealing with the 55 or 60 degrees that remains the constant that you've got as you built that house into, you know, into the side of a hill of some sort. The ways that they are using rammed earth and using the tires as a form with which to build the rammed earth walls allows that to, becomes similar to the traditional adobe that is built out in that area. So where you're dealing with thick clay mixed with other fiber things, whether it be everything from straw to whatever that fiber might be available to them. And those things work, and they work particularly well in the Southwest. We have a variety of different ways that we can build that sort of whole systems thinking, so that you want to take your windows, your primary windows, you're going to put them all on the south facing sides of the house. You're going to limit the amounts on the north and west side. You're going to, we can build in thermal mass into the house. You can, what the sun is going to shine on while it's, coming through those windows. But you have to remember to insulate, to hold that heat or cool away from where it might get, into the sink. So in this area, instead of, if you're going to be building with masonry and such that could act like that, we need to make sure that it doesn't just get sucked off into the ground. So, insulating under the slab to be able to contain that heat, putting the insulation to the outside of the building instead of, internal to it. There's a bunch of different ways to adapt to that kind of stuff. I'm not real big on tires in the middle of buildings.
Right, yeah, there's one, I believe there's one that's actually built in Georgia. It's over in Madison County, and I think they use it as like a B&B. You can go like visit it there. And they did not, like code wouldn't allow for them to build with tires. And obviously, so he built it a little different way, but used the same design feature, and it still like keeps it self-regulated. Like they just stacked up on the back side of the building, like a bermed earth structure, and then ran a vent through it to kind of help regulate, used a skylight to circulate air throughout there using just the natural forces of like convection and conduction. And it seemed, I haven't been there yet, I haven't tried it. I'd like to go stay there just to see how it works. I know they're building one in Florida, supposed to be hurricane proof. It's a lot more humid down here, so we can't build them quite the same way they do. We have to add like more limestone and concrete to it for it to work. But
there's also issues around how they do some of that circulation, air circulation, because in some cases they will be building piping into the under slabs to be able to remotely bring air into the house and through it, and that works in drier areas, whereas in hot, humid areas, the insides of all of those pipes would just be instantly molded, and it would not be a healthy air thing. So we need to look at moisture as one of the things that we have to be working with to make sure our houses are healthy.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's great. Crystal, I'll let you and Roy take that conversation offline. James Marlowe, it's good to see you. I know you recently did a webinar. Can you just give us a 1-minute report how the webinar went?
Well, we've been doing some webinars on a group, on a project called the Georgia Clean Energy Project. And we've been getting good participation and getting some good input, just working with a group of thought leaders. So, I think getting people together as you're doing is very important in this time, and, to continue to move forward in as many fronts as we can. But I do think we've been having some very good speakers, some very good participants, and we're kind of looking at some options from a policy standpoint. I'll share a more detailed update very, very soon. So hoping we can do it in person.
Yeah, that sounds good. Jason or Hamilton, any news from what you guys have been working on? Mute yourself, unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
I missed the button. I'm Jason Hershey. This is the first call that I've been able to attend, so I thank Julian for inviting me. I'm from the Georgia Tech Energy Club. Next week, we're having a webinar featuring Gunter Konzelman, who's a scientist at Argonne National Lab, and talk about his modeling efforts for the Department of Energy North American Energy Resilience effort, building in more resilience specifically to natural gas infrastructure. And we're going to try to have more webinars this summer through the Georgia Tech Energy Club, and hopefully Julian can pass that information along to all of you.
Great. Roy, I hope you didn't hear that about the natural gas. Sorry. Hamilton, how about you? You got anything going on you want to report?
Sure. You actually made a good resource for me. I've been working with Dr. Brown on her solar summary with regards to the Drawdown Georgia project, and I'm doing a side project involving landfill solar and also just solar on general contaminated lands. And part of the problem I've run into, and I'm hoping maybe you may have some information, maybe who could talk to, is, you know, they say generally you're going to see increased costs just due to maybe like permits and things like that, just using these environmentally contaminated lands. And that's really hard to find online. Like, okay, so you say, you know, it's increased cost, but what's the exact number? And so do you know anything about, you know, using these contaminated lands for future use beyond like, what their purpose is as a landfill, for example? I know it's outside your wheelhouse a little bit, but I figured I might as well ask.
Well, certainly you take a brownfield like Atlantic Station, or I mean, we have a lot of contaminated lands in Georgia, and a lot of them are around the coast, and we're about to contaminate as soon as that Veserbar starts cutting on the Golden Ray.
Yeah.
Contaminate a whole lot more down there as we cut that thing into pieces, and all those cars start dropping out in the river. But I mean, clearly companies like these engineering consulting firms like United Consulting Group, for example, I mean, they go in and they help these companies figure out, okay, what is it going to take to bring this piece of land back? And I think it's probably a matter of money for a lot of these. You know, how much of this land can I reclaim? How do we need to, you know, how big a building can we build? Where do we need to put it? What do we need to do to remediate this? I mean, there are a lot of experts who've gone to Georgia Tech working for these firms that are able to tell these companies precisely what they need to do. And I think there's funding for this. You know, if they do this, it's just a matter of whether a company would have the will. I mean, take a company like Starbucks, right, that took the old Sears building in Seattle, turned it into their corporate headquarters. You look at, you know, even what's happened in Atlanta. Dr. Brown, do you know if when Jamestown, maybe James Marlowe knows this, when they redid the Sears building in Atlanta, was that considered a brownfield site or no?
I don't believe that it was.
Yeah, but certainly there are a lot of opportunities out there. Hamilton, if you like, I would be happy to introduce you to an engineer that works exclusively in brownfield development. A guy named David Huter. I interviewed him for my radio show. So if you'll if you just send me a note to email timothy.echols@gmail.com, I'll introduce you to him.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate your help.
Charlotte asked about the Aerotropolis, which is down by where Porsche is, and actually on the other side of the expressway. I think EPD is actually renting space in there. Charlotte, I know Riker was interested in, and they've bought a chunk of land in the Aerotropolis, and I'm trying to get them to put solar on that building. It's going to be a truck servicing facility. Half of it's in Clayton, half of it's in Fulton.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think one of the things that we could do is to encourage those county commissioners down in Clayton County in particular, Felicia, and the chairman, what is his name? Former police chief. But encourage them, you know, to consider making that a showcase, because one cool thing about the Aerotropolis is planes that are landing are able to, people that are flying look out the window, they can see those buildings. So if you've got solar on that building, that's certainly a great, kind of sends a great message. And my grandfather, built a house in the Aerotropolis back in 1940, before it was the Aerotropolis, right? It was Mountain View. It was the city of Mountain View. And they lost their charter because Ray King, the mayor of Mountain View, was beating people up in front of City Hall. And the governor, I think it was Governor Miller, yanked their charter as a city. But my grandfather helped build a church over there. And, the city of Atlanta bought all that land. I mean, there were a bunch of houses in there, and people lived there, but obviously the noise of the airplanes got to be too much. And so they turned it into something else. But we could make that a showcase for sustainability. I think you just have to have a company like Cox Enterprises, or I was hoping Porsche would be that company, but they decided not to put solar on their building. That would be the perfect building for it. But as much as the Germans love solar, they didn't put it on their building. So a lot of it has to do with finances and how much it costs. Well,
I should tell you that I am going to try to go on that board specifically for sustainability. I heard that I had been going to the Aerotropolis meetings before I started at Georgia Tech, and I started paying attention to their plans, and they are not even trying to save any of the growth, the urban forest there, or even the interface, which is my area. So I'm gonna see if I can get on that board just to do sustainability.
I think that would be a fantastic thing. And your target, I think, this is just my suggestion, the county commissioner from Clayton who has that district, and that's Felicia, I believe, and then the Fulton County commissioner and the at-large commissioners that have that, get in front of them and say, hey, can't we do better than this? And give them the challenge, because they have an inordinate amount of influence, because they approve ultimately zoning decisions down there. And that's what I found with the Ryder thing, is that I'm trying to get Ryder to do this, and they said, well, we can't get Clayton County to approve this or that. And so, and we had Ryder on one of my calls recently, talking about all the electric semi trucks that they're preparing for. So, we're certainly going to have electric semis in the future, that are caravanning together. What do they call that when they're going down together, hooked together? What's the word for that? I forget.
Convoy.
It's not convoy. It's close. It starts with a C.
Caravan.
Yeah, but where they can connect them together, and they're just up next to each other. But y'all, we're out of time today. So thank you everyone for your
Convoy.
Convoy. It's not convoy. It's platooning.
Platooning. Okay,
Yeah.
right. They do that in Australia.
It is a convoy, but the word Ali Kelly uses at is platoon.
It's platooning. That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you, Roy, for being on the call today. And so, we certainly, this whole energy stuff has certainly become a controversial topic. Believe me, I know. I get I get it from James. I get it from Kurt Ebersbach. I get it from Dr. Brown. I get it from my own staff sometimes. But we are moving forward with the plan. And George is blessed. This week on my radio show, I featured the debate from 1991, where Democratic Representative Boyd Pettit led the way in changing Georgia to being an IRP planning state. And that that code section has not been amended since 1991. And I featured, it wasn't the most exciting radio in the world this weekend, but I actually went to the archives, I got the audio, and I had our producer work on the volume, and we actually featured it on the radio so people could hear how energy planning came about in Georgia. And we do a 20-year plan. It's like a strategic plan that we do every 3 years, and we update it. So we do have a plan. It may not be the plan that you want, Roy, but it is a plan.
And for us academics that love to mine the plans, there's so much that's redacted, this blacked out. Anyway, it's great that the state is committed to doing an IRP. I just wish I could see it all.
Yeah, like I said, I get in trouble with everybody. Julian, you want to close out our call? Anything you need to say before we end our Zoom call today?
I had put something in the chat to see if there was an interest in continuing the discussion on high performance building, because we barely scratched the surface of it. And I would suggest maybe in a couple of weeks, we try to pick up where we left off.
Yeah, well, let me just have folks contact Julian, give him your opinion on that. We won't put you on the spot on the call. Dr. Brown, I did copy you with EPD subject matter.
Oh, thank you. Excellent.
For stationary sources, and he has some questions for you. Hopefully that will help you get to the answer you're looking for. Please let me know if there's anything I need to try to do or attempt to do or think.
I'll keep you in the loop as I resolve the apparent, inconsistency, probably to do with my understanding of the data. And Jamie, I'll copy you as well. Keep you in the loop. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Jamie. Thank you, Jamie, for being on the call today. Jamie's my renewable brain. And congratulations, Jamie, for becoming the unit director for renewables at the commission.
Well, thank you.
Excellent.
Yep. All right.
Everybody.
Bye, y'all.
See ya. Bye.